hope you're cheering on the NHS. Right across the UK, people are opening their front doors and their windows and clapping to celebrate the heroes who are on the front line of our COVID response across the UK. It's been amazing to see how many people have been willing to come back from retirement, or medical students who haven't even finished their degrees step forward, or nurses just risking their lives in order to keep people safe. We're so proud of our NHS and we thank you very much for your service. So don't forget, clap them on. And actually we shouldn't just do this today, it should be a normal part of our culture. These are definitely heroes. And it's made me think, actually, we've been rebooting who we consider our heroes right now. We used to only want to have pictures of movie stars, pop stars, and maybe sports stars on our screens. But actually they've become relatively irrelevant, haven't they? We now are recognising who the real heroes are. They're people like medics and nurses and social workers and teachers, people that serve our communities. What a brilliant rebooting and reimagining of what heroism looks like. And I think that's quite a good link into the topic we're going to be looking at tonight at FAQ, Faith and Quarantine. This is a nightly little video that I put out there, hopefully to offer some encouragement and some help. Many people are feeling anxious right now, and my hope is these little videos will help you and hopefully help you to help others. I'd love to know where you are and what you're doing. If you want to drop me a message, tell me that it's coming through okay. That helps me know that I'm not speaking to the ether. And maybe you want to tell me where in the world you are. The other day we had someone join us from Sri Lanka, I found out on the YouTube channel, and not far away in Beverly Hills in America. So tell us where you are, and I'd love to know about your day and how you've been getting on. This lock-in is changing the way that we live, isn't it? And at one level it's a massive inconvenience, at another level it's exactly the right thing that we're doing because we're trying to keep people safe. And sometimes we can get really down, and I find it really helpful just to reflect on what people around the world are experiencing right now. And we have so much to be grateful for even in this lockdown time. But one of the fun things that I've been doing is joining a lot of YouTube, Skype or Zoom calls, and that's been good for the environment. I haven't had to travel in order to be online to meet people. Everyone's kind of broadcasting from their house. Sometimes I've met colleagues from different organisations or different charities that are working together, or even government bodies, and we get to see the inside of each other's houses, which is unusual. We got to meet people's kids, because people are often kind of ricocheting between being at work or looking after children, and children have popped in and said hello. It's actually weirdly brought us a little bit closer together, hasn't it, even though we're far apart. What a paradox. And so today a friend of mine who works for number 10 Downing Street called a meeting, and it was a meeting trying to help how Christians and particularly church groups and charities might work with the government in order to help find better ways of caring for vulnerable people. And it was fun. My mate from number 10, he was in front of a bookshelf, and there on the bookshelf was my book. I probably gave it to him for free. He probably hasn't even read it, but it just kind of made me a little bit happy to see one of my books was actually out there in the world and maybe doing some good. Another friend of mine on the call had a massive picture of Margaret Thatcher on his wall behind him. And it's interesting who it is we have as our heroes. As I said, they're being rebooted now in this corona crisis. But I want to zoom in on a biblical hero, and he's an unusual hero actually. He's celebrated in a whole book of the Bible called Joshua. And you might know the name Joshua means Jehovah is salvation, or another way of putting that is God to the rescue. And because of the way the Hebrew language works, the word Joshua is exactly the same name as Jesus. So people might have called Jesus Yeshua or Joshua, the same word. And so there are going to be some resonances between this Old Testament book and the New Testament historical person of Jesus. So maybe you listen out for them as we go through. Now, the book of Joshua is a controversial book, and maybe you've got questions about it. Please zoom them in. We'd love to hear from you. Or maybe there's a question that you want to pose anyway, a question that you hope that we'll deal with in another episode. Well, please join in to that too. I know my friend Lisa is watching tonight with her home group, so a big shout out to her And give us a wave if you're maybe watching this on your own, or let us know if you're watching it with other people. We'd love to be in touch. Right, we have been looking over the last 3 episodes at the life of Moses and what we might learn from Moses in lockdown. But tonight we're going to zoom in to the book of Joshua. I'm going to read to you from Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the great sea on the west. No one will be able to go and stand up against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Let's just pause there for a minute. I've called tonight's talk leading or learning to lead when the world changes. And we're all experiencing a massive global change. You know, no one's flying anywhere anymore. It's become quieter. You can hear birds singing. We're worried about this coronavirus. Everyone's not sure about the future. There's a massive financial difference going on in our world. No one's quite sure how the world's going to be in a few weeks, in a few months, whether this change is temporary or whether everything's going to be slightly different from here going on. How do we lead when our world changes? Well, Joshua would have felt pretty similar. His world had changed. Joshua has spent the last 40 years as Moses' understudy, all going through the desert, where they had to wake up in the morning and eat bread that God had prepared for them, trek on a little bit more, set up camp again. And now Joshua is no longer the understudy because Moses has died. His great hero and mentor and leader has died. And now Moses has to step up and lead. Joshua has to step up and lead. And Joshua is going to lead the people in a very different set of circumstances. Moses was leading them through a kind of desert place, and now Joshua is going to lead them to conquer a land. And again, that's going to be all sorts of controversy. Maybe you want to ask me about that. But they're going to become a settled nation. They're going to live in one place. They're not always going to be on the move. They're going to be building homes and farms and industry. And that's the transition that Joshua's got to lead his people through. And I wonder whether leaders right now, maybe you are a formal leader, maybe that's in your job title, maybe you're a CEO or a leader of a charity or a leader of a church or a leader of a company. Or maybe you're just trying to lead your family the best you can, help your kids move on. Or maybe you're just trying to support other leaders in your life. Figuring out how to lead in a time of great change is pretty hard, because we're all making this up as we're going along. We've never been here before. Someone described this moment to me as trying to rebuild a Formula One racing car in the middle of a race. Or you might think we're trying to rebuild a ship while it's at sea rather than in dock. And that's the experience that Joshua had to kind of figure out. And the first few verses here tell us something important. Firstly, that God is a God who keeps his promises. God says, look, I had promised your ancestors that they will enter this land, and you're going to be the person that brings it through. And that's important, isn't it? That was a promise made to Abraham generations before Joshua came on the scene. And God says, look, I have been faithful. Even though you've been unfaithful and you've been in the desert for 40 years because of your unfaithfulness, I have been faithful. You can rely on me. I am the solid ground. And that's quite an important thing to learn, isn't it? What really will hold in changing times. I remember when my wife and I were working in Albania, there was an earthquake, and what had up until that moment seemed to be safe and secure, the kind of apartment block that we lived in, that felt safe and secure. But when the earthquake came, everything was uncertain. We didn't know what was trustworthy, what would be the solid ground. And God's saying to Joshua, I'm the solid ground. I don't change. I don't move like shifting shadows, it says in the New Testament, but I am absolutely reliable, and whatever your changing circumstances, I'm still the same God. I'm going to prove faithful like I did to all your ancestors before in different circumstances, but I'm going to be faithful to you. And in fact, Joshua, the same way that I was with Moses, I am going to be with you. And wow, was God with Moses? Do you remember we looked at this example when Moses' face shone because he'd been in the presence of God? That's how close Moses and God had been. Moses had almost a face-to-face encounter with God, and now Joshua is saying that's available for you. And you might know this, that in the New Testament it says that believers, Christians, can have the same level of intimacy with God that Moses knew. In fact, it says that when Moses was in the presence of God, he had to veil his face because everyone got a bit freaked out that he was shining, at least for a period anyway. And it says in 2 Corinthians that now we, with unveiled faces, reveal the glory of God. And so this promise of the presence of God with Joshua would be the same as Moses is actually reinforced in the New Testament. That's for us too. That God is going to be faithful and present with us. And then God reiterates the challenge ahead of Joshua, and it's a controversial one because there are already people living in the promised land. And God is going to ask Joshua to lead the people of Israel in battle against them. And some people get very jumpy about that. And I'm just going to totally sidestep that tonight because it's not the topic of our talk, and say, look, this book, Paradoxology, has a whole chapter in it called the Joshua Paradox. And it talks about what do you do with a God that seems to permit Joshua to commit genocide. But if you won't let me get away with that and ask you to read the chapter in my book, Paradoxology, then you ask a question about it and I'll do my best to answer it. Anyway, let's press on. Verse 6, let me go back there. Be strong and courageous because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey. This is an important bit actually. It might be worth putting this bit on the screen. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. All right, I don't know if you heard the repetition there. Over and over it comes over. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. And it's strange, isn't it? Because you don't hear a lot of Joshua speaking here. You just hear God speaking to Joshua. And because of that, we have to guess the other half of the conversation. It's like listening into half a phone conversation, isn't it? So why does God have to keep telling Joshua very timid and worried? And it's only through the presence of God that he's going to have any ability to lead at all. And this is quite an important principle because God is continually using unlikely people to lead his people. This will come out tomorrow when we look at the story of Rahab. And it will also come out when we look at the book of Judges. God deliberately chooses unlikely people. He's going to do the same in the New Testament. God chooses a really random group of people to be the disciples, and they weren't chosen because of their brilliance or wisdom or excellence. They were chosen to be examples of what God can do, and the glory is going to go to God. I sometimes think about it like this. I don't know if they still have these adverts on TV. I try to avoid TV adverts as much as I can. I find them a bit boring sometimes. But there used to be an advert for a shampoo called Head and Shoulders. And they used to find a model, and they used to wash half of the model's head in a normal shampoo and the other half of the model's head in Head and Shoulders. And Head and Shoulders was particularly good at getting rid of dandruff. And this whole premise for the model only worked if the model had bad dandruff to begin with, because then they could show a difference, couldn't they? So they've washed half the model's head in a normal shampoo and it still had loads of dandruff, while the Head and Shoulders half was completely fixed. That difference, that benefit of the product only works if the model had bad dandruff to begin with. That's how the product shines. And in the same way, look, if Joshua was a brilliant leader, he was already super competent and super powerful and super brilliant at everything he could do, then God's glory wouldn't shine through. Maybe you know that from the story of Moses. Moses said, God, you've chosen the wrong person. I'm not even good at speaking. Why don't you choose my brother? And God's saying, well, actually, I'm going to display my glory through your weakness. Does the same with Joseph. He was a bit arrogant, wasn't he? And God still used him. Or Jacob, he was a swindler, and God still used him. Or Abraham. Abraham is only, he's described as good as dead. And then he becomes the father of a nation. Why? Because before God was involved in these people's lives, they were nothing. And afterwards, he's brought transformation. Maybe you feel as a leader very inadequate. Well, that's almost one of the best qualifications you can have as a leader. I know I feel inadequate. I know I'm pretty messed up in all sorts of ways. I know I'm pretty good at making mistakes, bad choices. And my prayer is, even through my weakness, God's glory will be displayed. And I think that's particularly important at a time when the world's changing, when we're not quite sure what's ahead. If we're asking leaders to come up with all their own ideas or lead in their own strength, we're going to be in trouble. We need leaders that are going to be able to depend on God, the God that's faithful and unchanging. That's what we need. And so I wonder if that's why over and over and over again in the book, well, even the opening chapter of Joshua, Joshua is told, be strong and courageous. I am with you. There's a promise there. Wherever you go, I will be with you. I don't know about you, that gives me great confidence for the future. That's saying, however things are going to work out, whether we just come out of this time of isolation into back to normal life, or whether we don't, God is with us. God will be reliable and faithful, and therefore we can be strong and courageous. God's part of the job, be reliable and faithful. Our part of the job, be courageous, because we have a God that we can trust. But the other part that I think Joshua is supposed to learn here was the importance of the word of God. Verse 8, do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Look, for most of us, this is our first moment of being in a crisis like this. And actually, if you think about it, for all of us, this is our first time of living life, right? We've not been the age we've been before. We've never been in these circumstances before as human beings. We're all kind of making up life as we go along, doing the best we can. But God's wisdom is timeless. And so what Joshua is told is, look, if you allow God's word to kind of ruminate in your brain, meditate on it, allow it to kind of not just be in one ear and out the other, but allow it to kind of stick in the middle. Allow your brain to kind of think it over and kind of chew on it and allow your brain to kind of sink into its stories and its narratives. Your brain will be transformed. Your wisdom will arise, because God's wisdom will be imparted on you. We're having a fun experiment right now at home with some carrot tops as part of our homeschooling for all of our children that are in lock-in with us. And those carrot tops, they only flourish and grow, and they grow in little kind of shoots at the moment if they're immersed in water. Water is needed. And by putting the carrot top in the water leaches in, or through a process of osmosis, it comes into the carrot and it brings life and vitality. And Joshua has been told, allow your brain to soak in the word of God. It's going to give you what you need. It's one of the reasons why I want to share a little bit each night with you. My prayer is that through thinking on these stories and not rushing through them, but spending a bit of time allowing our brains and our hearts, our imaginations to soak in the word, we will get the wisdom that we need to lead our lives and to lead other people and to maybe lead our companies and country better, because God's word will give us the wisdom we need. So I really like the book of Joshua. I know it's got controversy in it. I know we've got to deal with the apparent genocide. Well, you ask me a question about that and I'll do my best to answer it. Otherwise, please be in touch. Tell me what you think of these things, whether you think they should be a lot shorter or a lot longer, whether you can understand my accent if you're coming from somewhere else in the world, if you've got an idea of what we should be doing, if you're liking what you're seeing, give us a thumbs up. I know that some groups are using this as a kind of home group material, so they're kind of watching it together and then discussing it. They're watching it together by being in different places, but just watching it synchronously at the same time. Or if you kind of missed some of the videos so far, they're all kind of uploaded a day later onto YouTube, and you can watch and share. But it's been lovely to spend some time with you. Don't forget to keep cheering on the NHS. We're having our idea of what a hero looks like rebooted, and I look forward to meeting you tomorrow when we're going to look at the little known and little understood story of Rahab and what she can teach us about life in lockdown. Have a great evening.